what is an empty and acid wash? Well, literally, you pump all of the water out of a swimming pool, you empty it, and then you acid wash it. This is a very severe, very major thing to do to your swimming pool. You've got to be really careful when you empty an in-ground swimming pool because in the same way that, did you know some yachts that sail on the sea are actually made of concrete? They have a concrete hull. When a swimming pool is empty, if there's groundwater and water sitting around it, it can actually float and pop out of the ground. So you've got to be very careful about making sure there's not groundwater in and around your swimming pool. If the water's really muddy and wet, you just simply don't empty your swimming pool. Way too dangerous. Yes, I have seen this with a fiberglass pool where it has popped a foot out of the ground. Does happen. So, first of all, that's the first thing to check to make sure the ground's not wet if you're going to pump the swimming pool out. The other thing is you need to know about the surface of the swimming pool. Some surfaces, like a marble sheen surface or a fiberglass surface, are quite reactive, and these surfaces react with the water and the pH, the calcium, and all the rest of it in a swimming pool, and they can tend to stain. One of the biggest reasons for an empty and acid wash, if a pool's been left to go green and has been that way for a very long period of time, the walls will be stained, and they will actually need a severe way of getting them clean. There's a mild form of acid wash. You can tip sort of 8 to 15 litres of hydrochloric acid into say around a 50,000 litre swimming pool, and that will acidify the water, and that will reduce off a lot of stains. It will soften up calcium and all sorts of things. That's not an empty and acid wash, that's just acidifying the water, and you can then, well, some people even at that point pump their water out. If you do that, a lot of your calcium and minerals will actually sink to the bottom. So at the very, very least, you do need to change some water, but at the very least you can vacuum the pool out to waste. So even though you may not be able to see it, just very slowly go over the whole bottom of the pool so that whatever dissolved calcium and all the minerals and the total dissolved solids that have settled to the bottom, you can get as much of that out as possible. So the big dose of acid will actually bring those minerals and some of the stains and some of the calcium, all the rest of it, into solution and then settle down to the bottom. That's why you give it a vac to waste. So that's a mild form of doing this. But I'm going to talk to you about here is actually pumping the pool dry and giving it an acid wash. So the first thing, as I touched on, is about emptying the pool. Really serious matter, and you've got to make sure it's dry, and you may have to wait for appropriate weather or even dig away if you've got groundwater around your pool all the time, or look at a different method. Once the pool is empty, it really is just a simple matter. I mean, you've got to gear up with all of the big long arm length rubber gloves, safety glasses, and clothing to cover all of you, because you don't want to get acid on your skin or certainly on your eyes or anything like that. Mix up a solution of acid and water. With a swimming pool, when I'm doing this, I always start off about sort of 4 to 1 or 5 to 1, depending on how bad it is. That's 1 part of acid to 4 parts of water. And again, you add your 4 parts of water into the watering can and then add the acid in on top. And then with the watering can, just walk around and coat the whole swimming pool surface. And it will then run down the walls and acid treat the walls. Now, the big thing to keep in mind there, is particularly again with your reactive surfaces, is that if the water is sitting and pooling, the water and acid mix is sitting and pooling somewhere, or if it's running off the edge of a step or something like that, you've got to be careful that it doesn't actually create a little ridge, like dig a little river, because the acid is, hey, it's acidic, it can really eat away at certain spots. This swimming pool you're looking at images of here, I started off exactly what I said, about 4 to 1, 1 part acid, 4 parts of water. I didn't touch it. It was just way too strong. It wasn't moving. It had nothing at all was going on until I had it 50-50. And that's very strong and very severe. And it did cause a big impact on the surface of the swimming pool. But that was all there was to it. I didn't have any choice in that. There was no reaction happening at all. This was very stained. It had been stained for a long period of time. And that was what it took to get that staining off and the walls back to what they needed to be. Okay, so how to empty an acid wash a swimming pool. We've been pumping this guy out overnight. We've dropped a submersible pump into almost the deepest part. The deepest part is where that fitting is.
there in the middle, right there. And the pump was standing up when we started off, but just due to the weight of water that's in that hose, it's tipped over, which is fine. It means the float valve, the little orange thing sticking out the side there, is a float valve, so it should automatically turn off when the water gets down. But it started to suck air. So what we're going to do is empty and acid wash this pool. We've got rust stains here, and in the corner here there's another rust stain, and then just lots of discoloration around the swimming pool. This is a marble sheen pool, so we're going to give it all clean and bring it back to nice. You see there down around the there's an in-floor cleaning system where all the staining has taken place. So we're going to just give it an acid wash and give it all a clean up. You get to see how it is. So at this stage it's just in with a submersible pump. You can't use your pool pump and equipment because as soon as you get below the skimmer box that stops working. So using a submersible pump to pump the pool out, and then it's literally with a watering can and a watered down acid mix. We walk around and wash all of the walls, get it all clean, give it a scrub where it's needed, working on the rust spots. There's another rust spot there, so we'll probably actually grind those back a little bit. We'll see exactly what they are and then make the choice from there. But bring it all back, get rid of all these stains, and particularly this pool is full of calcium spots. Have a look at these guys. So they are all going to come out as well. The calcium does not like acid. It'll just fizzle and disappear as soon as we run the acid over it.
Yeah, I wish they just fizzled and disappeared as soon as we run the acid over them. If they haven't been there for too long or aren't too set, that can happen. But these guys, they were just like concrete as they were. Once we'd given them the big dose, as I said, even 50-50, what happened over time, they softened up. They did fizzle, but they stayed in place. They softened up so that we could then give them a scrape. And I had a little a wooden spatula that I could go around and scrub the surface where the calcium was. Just give them all the scrub, get it flat, and then I went over with the acid again, and then they totally disappeared. So I have the garden hose running the whole time I'm doing this and putting the acid on. And as I said, if there's acid sitting on a step or something like that, you need to bring the hose up to dilute it down once it's done its job, because on the reactive surfaces particularly, it's not so bad on paint and some of the less reactive surfaces, but you don't want to leave acid because it can pit and dig a hole. So I then started to work on the rust spots. This had a couple of places where the metal Rio was actually coming through and causing those rust spots on the wall. So what we did, I mean, it's just a major repair to fix that properly, but in order to patch it up, what we did, we actually, I got an angle grinder in there just to knock it back a little bit and to then create a bit of a divot in the wall to get back into where the rust was. And then I used silicone sealer. You can try an epoxy if you can get it to sit in there, but normally just, you don't want to make a mess and run it all down the wall. Just use silicone sealer to seal it up as best as we could. And then I got a drain cover, or a suction cover actually, and just fitted it over the top, so that so far as the users and everyone was concerned, it was just another fitting in the pool and it was no longer standing out and no longer visible. But with those reinforcement fittings coming through, that is just going to keep on staining. So that was our way, just a bit of dig it back, put silicone over it to keep the water off it and stop the rust stain coming through, and then put a cover over the top of the whole thing. As you can see from the images here, you can see again the pitted surface of the quartzon or marble sheen, but those rust stains, they didn't really back off at all. They were still very evident and very much there once I'd given it heaps and heaps of acid, so they weren't going to come off, unfortunately. Normally with an acid wash, pressure washing afterwards isn't necessary. With this pool it was. As I said, the stains on this were just really stubborn. So you can see here I had to get a pressure washer. You see just off to the left the little squiggles, that's all the hose was doing. That was the full pressure I could get through a concentrated nozzle on the hose. So this pool needed a pressure wash as well. Now swinging around here, if you have a look at the steps, you can see when I did the steps, the grey part there is the pool without any acid on it. And the pressure washer, when I hadn't put the acid on, didn't move any of those stains at all. It was only when it had the acid first, had a bit of time to soak, and then it had the pressure washer that those stains came off. So you will have to work out what you've got and how much time and effort you're going to put into it and what you're going to have to do with all of your staining and all of your fittings. As I said at the start of this video, I would recommend you leave this up to professionals rather than doing all the mistakes on your pool. But if you're going to have a go, then hopefully these tips will help you out. Now, marble sheen or quartzon pools are supposed to have a product in them to stop the calcium from forming. There's a CalStop product you can get to make that less of a problem. But the big thing I would say to you is if you've got a quartzon pool, don't be adding granular calcium hypochlorite type of chlorine, and don't be adding calcium chloride to the water. I'll explain, have a look at the link just above here, the video about stop adding calcium to your pool, and that'll explain why you wouldn't want to do those in those pools.